Welcome to our Civic Works Committee meeting on April 24th, 2017. I'll call the meeting to order, and I'll look to my committee for disclosures of pecuniary interest. I see none. So at that, I'll go to the consent items, and I'll ask if anybody that has an item they'd like pulled. Councillor Armstrong. Okay, number 2. Any others? Okay, so I'll take a motion to move the consent items from 2 to 11, and I'll look to my colleagues for comments on number 2, which is the patio design guidelines for on-street municipal parking spaces. Councillor Armstrong.
Okay, I just wanted to ask staff, I'm okay with the proposal. It's just the, as maybe I'm not quite understanding how this works. There's protection at both ends, but along where the road is on the outer side facing the other lane, there isn't going to be any wheel stops or anything there to stop cars who may find themselves going into the patio from the opposing lane. I hope I explained that.
Oh, I'm sorry, and let's go to staff.
Thank you through the chair to the councillor. First, I'll identify that this report is strictly for information. We're not approving anything here tonight or today. These patio design guidelines actually will be included in a future urban design guidelines that the city is actually putting together. On page, if I understand the question correctly, on page 5, it speaks to a guide rail which would be present on 3 sides of the patio, and that would help protect all 3 sides of the patios themselves. So the guide rail will be not less than 1.07 meters high, designed in a manner to resist a certain load. So that would provide protection on all sides of the patio itself.
And I sort of got that already, the 2, but the guardrail, as you call it, is the guardrail on the outside? Is that like at the ends? Is there anything like concrete there? Is that the kind of, I noticed I think it's 1.2 meters high or whatever it is. On the ends, I'm not concerned about. It's the outer wall, because I think I've seen these last year, these patios out there, and it seemed to me that there was nothing on the outside. Yeah, there's the platform, and there's the railing, but there isn't anything that, in my mind, would stop a vehicle on the outside. Can you sort of give me a better understanding of what you're putting on the outside? Is it just a wood guardrail in most instances?
Through the chair to the councillor, the patios that you would have seen last year did not have any of that protective devices out there, and that's one of the primary drivers behind this report, was from the safety perspective to ensure that as we move forward that those patios are designed in a manner to prevent cars from hitting them and causing sort of damage. So a guide rail itself could be either a bollard guide rail, which would stop a vehicle, or a physical guide rail that you see on the sides of the road, something that would prevent vehicles from going through that area.
Okay, and I get that. I guess the question is, these patios were out there. I think there's 1 or 2, but the thing is, now we're looking at doing that because you want to make it a safer situation. When we allowed them in the past, they didn't have these guide rails. So we're doing it now, but I'm just thinking, on hindsight, shouldn't we have made them that safe in the first place? Because as you said, we didn't have them now. This is how they're going to be in the future. So why didn't we do that in the past? Because that would have been what I would have saw. And when I saw them, I thought, this isn't very safe. So can you tell me why we didn't sort of, when we first introduced these on-street patios, why we didn't have that in place?
Through the chair to the councillor, the previous versions had the wooden guide rails out there. What we're just saying, what we're doing here in this report is really providing more of the design guidelines for anything as we move forward in a more detailed manner. So the other guide rails or other patios were safe. What we're looking at is providing enhanced safety as we move forward.
Councillor Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to speak in support of this. I think it's quite a good idea to dovetail this into the urban design guidelines. And I see across the city that there's an appetite to do this sort of thing on a larger scale. So that's very good. And I think that it just adds a whole nother ambiance to a lot of our local businesses and the way that they can serve their patrons. And I think that the one question that I do have is in the diagram on page 4, and sorry if this is just a fluffy question, but is it just tables that we're gonna allow, or like benches and rows and that sort of thing? Or is it just based on head counts and what's allowed in the parking space?
To the chair, to councillor, I think what we're talking about here today really is about the patio itself. What's allowed on there, that's more of a planning issue, and I'll leave that for my planning colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Soldo. More at 4 at planning.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. Since we're dealing with all the consent items together, I did have a couple of comments. It looks like we're approving about $28 million in infrastructure projects, which is a good thing. Some of these are much needed. I'm going to draw attention to a couple things that you're probably used to me drawing attention to, and that's the contract tenders versus estimates. I note 2 of them are quite underestimated, so they've come in high to a cumulative total of about $750,000. That being said, one of them came in quite low. So overall, it's about $1.2 million less than we expected to spend. Do you have any comments as to why we see the discrepancies in this one? I know there was some touching on the asphalt prices were speculative based on last year. Is there anything else I should be aware of?
Thank you to the chair, to the councillor. Number of these projects have various drivers, and some of them could be related to when they were tendered. Some of them could be related to the type of work itself it is, if there's any specialty work that's being undertaken. I think it would be safe to say that as we move forward this year, we may start to see cost estimates that are higher, and that's really related to the volume of work that's out there. The PTIF funding that was announced recently is across the province, and what we're seeing in a number of tenders as they're coming in, specialty items, things such as bridge girders and other items like that, they're a commodity, and I think we might start to see some higher costs. When there's infrastructure spending programs such as those that have been announced, we tend to start to see higher costs as we move forward. The one that was in particular here that was under the cost estimate really was a greenfield construction, so that one there is probably being driven by the fact that we don't have traffic control and other items that really are driving things up. But in general, we look at the cost estimates from, or costs that we had in previous years, updated based on the information that we have, but there are fluctuations based on the volume of work that's out there and the specialty items within each project.
And just a quick follow-up, I know that if we delay projects, then we have to account for inflation in future years. Are any of these projects, especially the ones that are coming higher under the estimate, ones that you would recommend that we delay to maybe when the construction slows down a little bit? Could we find some cost savings there?
Through the councillor, through the chair to the councillor, I would say that the volume of work will not decrease in the next 5 to 10 years. The amount of work that we're doing as a city, plus the infrastructure works that are being done across Ontario, There is more and more construction that's going to be taking place. Delaying things will not provide us with better costs coming in as we move forward.
So on that, is there anything else that's coming forward in the near future that we should speed up to get in while we still can, maybe under the current rates?
I will say, through the chair to the councillor, we have a lot on our plate, and getting the project that we do have out the door is limited by staff resourcing, consultant, industry resources, and contractor resources. With all the work that's going on, not only in London, southwestern Ontario, but Ontario as a whole, the amount of contractors out there that are available to undertake the work is very limited at this time, given the volume that's out there. And hence, I don't think we're capable of, or there's enough capacity in the industry to move anything forward.
I'll go to Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for allowing me a couple of questions at your so involved meeting. I certainly appreciate it. I have a question on item number 2 as well as item number 4. May I proceed?
Please do.
Thank you. With respect to item number 2, mine is for a little bit more clarification, and I do recognize that this report is to received. But we tried this out a couple of years ago, and I didn't see a lot of takers for it, and I just wondered if we had any statistics with how people felt about it. The ones that I remember seeing was really on the extended, it wasn't on the on-street parking, it was between the on-street parking. There may have been some on the on-street parking that I didn't recognize. And the only ones that I saw was on Dundas Street. So my question is this for specific parts of the city? And also, is this going to be, we're going to be taking up some of the parking spots? Because when I look on Dundas Street, there's not a whole lot of parking spots that you would want to take up for this purpose, but in between where the curb bulges out, in between the on-street parking. So can I get a little bit more explanation through you to staff on this? This is item number 2 I'm talking about.
Yes. So, do we get a little more explanation on that for the councillor?
Through the chair to the councillor, these guidelines specifically are for on-street municipal parking spots themselves. So in terms of patios that are between the curb and the buildings themselves, this report doesn't speak to that, and I don't unfortunately have any information related to the amount of utilization for that. These guidelines are for all on-street parking spots. So it could be in the downtown, it could be in Old East Village, it could be in other areas as well.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. I won't make any other comments on that. Item number 4, to do with the AMO agreement with AMO for confidentiality. One of the things that I'm always concerned about is when we go into confidential sessions, we as a council, sometimes we challenge whether this should be discussed here, whether it could be discussed in open. So this subject, this is just one, through you to staff, this is only this one specific subject that we're talking about with respect to AMO. And why is it that it has to come to us for this confidentiality? I know that Mr. Stanford is a member of a committee on this, but is it because we want to say if he brings this to us, then we have to discuss it in confidential sessions? Can I get a little bit more explanation in this through you, Mr. Chair?
Certainly. Let's go to Mr. Stanford for that answer.
Through the chair, what we see here is something that would not be uncommon in a situation like this. It is, we'll be sharing documentation as municipal practitioners with AMO and vice versa. And some of that, unfortunately, is stuff that it would hamper our further discussions with industry as we try to negotiate the best possible recycling program costs and payments in the future. What you have before you, and the reason it is here, is that on page 20, AMO has selected a term called "I have the authority to bind the corporation." In something like this, I do not have the authority of that. Only the mayor and city clerk have the authority of buying council unless it is delegated. And in this case, it hasn't been, so the easiest approach is to actually have this run the normal route. It does not have anything to do with in-camera meetings here at the City of London. If anything like that came forward, that would be actually handled by staff through committee and legal services here locally. It would not involve AMO in that case.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Hubert, you had a question.
I do. It's on item number 11. Is that appropriate at this time?
Absolutely.
Okay. So we're talking about, and this is sort of to all the moving parts, and I'm trying to understand the implications of what we're talking about here. LTC is saying that they need to delay the movement of buses off of Dundas Street. I want to know what the implications of that are, Mr. Chair, to the Dundas project. And I think we've talked here before about, we've got Dundas Place, we've got RT, we've got cycle tracks, we've got, you know, and I'm trying to understand the implication of this to all of those things.
Thank you. Then perhaps we can go to staff for who would like to address that question. I do know that we have Ms. Belechny here as well. Thank you for attending.
So maybe I'll ask Ms. Belechny to speak to her letter first, and then I'll provide some commentary on how it impacts Dundas Place and the others.
Just with respect to the letter and what the commission is indicating would be the best path forward, it's really got to do with making the move once versus making the move and then having to move back, given that the construction isn't completed on the corridors that we're being moved to. We have had discussions with Civic administration on this approach, and they're generally on side. Again, I'll let Mr. Soldo speak to what the specific implications are. But the plan with respect to moving buses in September assumed that all of the infrastructure work that would be required on Queens and King would be done in time for that move to take place. And what we're seeing now, given a number of the balls that are still up in the air, is that won't be the case. So what we're suggesting from the transit riders' perspective, the best case scenario is to make that move once. And we're suggesting that the most appropriate time for that would be in April of 2018.
Thanks, Ms. Belechny. In terms of the infrastructure works that she referred to, moving the buses off of Dundas requires them to have the stops on King, Queen, Wellington. It also involves moving the various electronic signboards that they have at those locations, which provide rider information of when the vehicles are going to be coming. So we have done a lot of the work in terms of designing for that, but given the uncertainty on Queens, we don't know what we're actually designing in that perspective. Is it something that integrates with the cycle track? Is it something that integrates with no cycle track there? There's a significant amount of work to be undertaken. It's about, I believe it's about $300,000 worth of work that was identified in the PTIF application for the rerouting of buses off of Dundas Street. And at this time, given where we are with the uncertainty related to the shift routes, it's not feasible or manageable to actually undertake that work before September. In terms of the impacts it has to the Dundas Place, I believe that was a specific question. Dundas Place is being designed. There's going to be obviously more consultation as we move forward with what the final design is. Our goal is to tender early next year. That tendering of the work and the actual construction of Dundas Place will be coordinated with the London Transit Commission. At this time, we don't believe there will be an impact on the construction that can't be managed with the timelines that have been identified in Mrs. Belechny's letter from the LTC.
London Downtown Business Association aware of the delay?
Councillor Park.
Thank you. We did discuss this at a board meeting, and so the board members are aware. They're also quite comfortable with moving forward with this, recognizing that the LTC is a huge commission in terms of changing one gamut of the riders, where riders can get on and off. There's, you know, rippling effects to that. As one of the movers of the original motion, I'm content with what I'm seeing today, recognizing that we're going with rapid transit and all the uncertainty. The best analogy I can come up with is, you know, when you're doing your zipper up and like your drawstring gets caught in it and you just can't do the rest of it. I think that's the situation we're in right now. We're gonna get our zipper done up. It's just a matter of when and how. Thanks.
Thank you for the metaphor.
Use one.
All right, and also thank you to the Trans Commission. In your letter, it was clear the great amount of work it takes to redo a route. So there's a lot of work that's needed in order to make this happen, and we do need to give them the time to do that. Any other comments on these items? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. My comments are about item number 8, the widening of Western Road and Warncliffe Road and the grade separation there. Obviously, this is a very significant undertaking. The tender is $13 million. I'm glad to see that CPR is kicking in some money for part of the work there. I think it's 1.7 or $1.8 million. I know we're widening it to 4 lanes so that we can deal with the capacity issues that we have north and southbound in that part of the city. As we're looking at alternative routes for rapid transit, I just want our staff to speak to, we're talking about going to 4 lanes. If 2 of those were dedicated for buses, the kind of capacity issue we would continue to have on Western Warncliffe Road for cars. Right now it's just 2 lanes. We're widening it so you have 4 lanes for cars, and now we're going to talk about perhaps going back to 2 lanes for the foreseeable future. So I know this project's underway. I know that the option of, say, widening to 6 lanes could have been considered, for example, but that would have huge impacts. And I just wonder if our staff could speak to what's going on there.
Okay, if I could have a comment about that Western Road widening.
Thank you through the chair to the councillor. And I guess I will refer to page 44 of the report. The construction that's ongoing today is based on an approved environmental assessment the council approved. It does take into account a widening to 4 general purpose lanes through that corridor underneath the widening bridge, and this contract specifically deals with that localized area, being the bridge itself. The bridge itself does accommodate sidewalks underneath the bridge. It accommodates bike lanes underneath the bridge. It accommodates 4 general purpose lanes as well as a southbound left turn lane at Oxford Street. That's all based on the approved environmental assessment. It does not preclude the review of alternatives as was directed by council in that area, except if you're looking at something beyond 4 lanes. If it goes to 6 lanes, the bridge construction that's already underway would preclude that. We would need to have a wider bridge. And I would say to you, it's very technically unfeasible to widen that bridge to 6 lanes. It would require lowering the road. It would require a lot of different technical things there, including significant property impacts. At this point, that environmental assessment was to take into account the travel congestion that we see currently on Western Road to the north. We'll be reporting back to council and on May 3rd, what are the implications of potentially taking away a lane along that section for rapid transit. It will have an impact on the capacity of the roadway to the point where it would be very much similar to what's there today, where we have significant congestion north of Oxford Street.
Okay, thank you. I'll look again for further questions. Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to follow up on a question. I'm not so sure that I heard what Councillor Helmer said with respect to CPR, but I'm going to ask the question. I thought, and I may have misunderstood him, I thought he was implying that CPR is making a contribution to this contract. Could I get a little clarification, because I didn't see that? Did I hear you wrong? Through you, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you, through the chair of the council. I'm actually going to ask Mr. McCray to answer that question as he's working through the details.
Cost apportionment for railway road grade separations is guided by a Canadian Transportation Agency document called the Guidelines of Apportionment of Cost of Grade Separations. It's described in on page 43 of the agenda. What it prescribes for this scenario is cost sharing of 85% to the road authority and 15% to the railway company. So, and that is based on the costs of the basic grade separation as it's defined in the guidelines. Based on the math, we predict it's after the establishment of actual construction costs that the contribution from Canadian Pacific Railway will be in the range of $1.7 million.
Continue.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, I need to, I want to be sure that I understand this, because it says that the scope of the work shared results in an estimated contribution from CPR as $1.7 million. And I get that. But on the other page, it also says that we're issuing a work order for $2.9 million to CPR, a purchase order for CPR services in the value of $2.9 million, excluding HST. Can you help me understand the difference between those two or what they mean? I understand the 1.7. If I understand it right, that's a contribution from CPR. But it sounds to me as though we are paying them $2.9 million also. Is that correct? And if it is it over and above the 1.7? As well as, is that all included in the $13 million? I need to just understand it a little bit more. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
So the construction of the railway grade separation requires that the railway company undertakes some of the work. So the value of that work is represented by that $2.9 million purchase order. Those costs go into the cost of the grade separation that is cost shared. So while we have to issue a purchase order to the railway company to undertake some of the work, we will eventually recoup a percentage of that and also a percentage of the construction contract back in the value of 1.7. So the $2.9 million PO is part of the greater project costs that are then cost shared.
So, Mr. Chair, in effect, just bare basic mathematics is costing us $1.2 million and the railway 1.7. Is that one way of looking at it? Because I'm hearing that you're saying that the railway is making a contribution of $1.7 million. But you're also saying that their services is costing us 2.9. And if I hear you right, you're saying that that 1.7 is included in a 2.9, which would make it basic mathematics $1.2 million that it will cost us. Help me clarify that.
Maybe if I can start. This report before you refers to $13 million to be paid to a contractor to undertake the work. Previously, the city has already issued a purchase order to CP in the order of almost $3 million. That means we're up to about $16 million on this project. And what we'll be recouping in the future is $1.7 million from CP.
That's very helpful. So the CP portion is outside of the $13 million. And that mathematics that I talk about between the 1.7 and the 2.9 is strictly with the CP. So in essence, in total, outside of the consultant work, we're paying $13 million and whatever, plus approximately $1.2 million, more or less. net.
Yes, you can certainly view that as if they're paying us to pay for a portion of their services. Right? And if there are no more comments, then we have a mover and a seconder for the consent items in the mayor and Councillor Ridley. So I'll call that question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 5-0.
That brings us to the scheduled items, and I'd like to ask Councillor Armstrong to take the chair for me.
Okay, we're dealing with,
We have Ms. Stratton here to speak to that.
oh,
Okay.
I guess we'll hear from Ms. Stratton first. No? Oh, I'm sorry. Chair, you wish to speak to this item? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And colleagues, we're looking at the Transportation Advisory Committee's strategic plan, and I want to thank the committee and the chair for a very ambitious plan and all the work they've done. However, as staff and I went through it at the pre-meeting, we identified a number of unintended consequences in the requests and in the work plan that had the potential to create some redundancies, some increased demands on resources, perhaps increase the turnover times and perhaps deviation from the strat plan. So our thoughts at the time was that it would be valuable to refer this back and create an opportunity for the chairs and the staff to contemplate some revisions. So I did make a motion to that effect. Okay, so I move that, and the mayor said he would second that motion.
Okay. Do you want to, Councillor Hubert?
Just for
Oh.
For clarity, we're referring back the work plan, item number 7 alone. Is that correct? Is that your intent? Through the chair to the
Yes.
chair.
Councillor, is that your intention? Just the work plan?
The work plan and the requests made in the report.
Item number 7.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. Through the chair to the mover of the motion, I wonder if anyone had an opportunity to connect with the chair of the TAC committee prior to this meeting to talk about this motion.
Councillor, could you respond to that?
No, I didn't.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. With all due respect, we have a delegation request. We have a volunteer from the community who has been to this meeting twice. I think it would be very inappropriate of this committee to have that individual come twice, prepared to present, and then through, a procedural motion, send them away. I may not be opposed to deferring the work plan, but I believe that if the chair of the TAC committee is here and would like to speak to it, we may get some further insights, and we may still proceed down this way, but I can't wrap my head around how we will continue to retain volunteers on our advisory committees if we ask them to take time away from their lives, show up at council meetings just to send them away. So I would respectfully request before we continue to debate this that we hear if there's anything that the chair would like to say. She may not. I know in the past she's been here just to answer questions, but perhaps there's some further insights we could gain before we proceed with this motion.
I think that's fair enough. Go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, if I may, and thank you, and of course the councillor is very proper, and my apologies that it had been my intent to contact the chair, but in light of other things that was difficult to do. Glad that the chair is with us. Happy to hear about the report.
Okay, so we'll hear from the committee chair at this point. Welcome.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I actually just wanted to be here to respond to any questions or concerns. So I would be happy to go over the points in the plan, but maybe the best way forward is to answer any questions that the committee has.
Committee, any questions of the chair?
I have no questions of the chair. I just noted the delegation request and wondered if there was anything that was to be presented to us. So barring no other questions, I'd be prepared to move back to the motion.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Chair. Appreciate you coming today. Okay, we need a seconder, I believe. Okay, we'll call the question. We're voting. Go ahead, Councillor.
Oops.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say that I agree with Councillor Van Holst that the best course of direction may be for the committee and staff to take a look at the work plan. I like work plans coming forward because it lays out for us what we expect from the advisory committee and what they expect from us in terms of timelines for the year ahead. So I was one of the original people that requested these work plans happen. I do review them, and I think it's important that we're able to meet the work plans. I think that they should be reviewed. I think that the opportunity to consult with staff and to make sure that we're using the advisory committee to the best of our ability is very important in this case. So I do want to thank the chair for attending, and hopefully this meeting with staff can occur in the nearest future so that we can get some direction on the work plan for the committee. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor. Okay, we're voting on this now.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 5-0.
That brings us to there's no items for direction. We've got deferred matters and additional business. Let's look at the deferred matters list. Any comments on those items? No, okay, I'll take a motion to approve and receive the deferred matters list. So let's call that question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 5-0.
All right, and are there any other items of additional business? Okay, then at that point, I'll thank my colleagues and the staff and call the meeting adjourned. So let's have a motion for that. And yes, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much.